at 6:12 p.m. We have 3 items this evening. Again, the goal of the work session is to have the town board receive information on topics of town business. And this evening, first item is housing policy options discussion with the Loveland Housing Authority Director, Sam Betters. But Sam, I think our board may have changed since you last visited us, so maybe we should go around so you know everybody here. You know, obviously Patty, so maybe we start here.
Ken Bennett, town board.
Paul Rennemeyer.
Cindy Showerman.
Carlin, planning. Do we know each other?
Miles Baker.
Yes, Miles.
Ivan Adams.
Christy Melendez.
Ian Parker.
Just a couple of faces.
Okay.
So that's all. Pretty good.
So great. So thanks for coming out. And are you going to lead the discussion then for us here this evening?
Yeah, I mean, I can, or I can respond to
Carlin,
questions.
started us off.
Sure. We also have some other members of the Windsor Housing Authority.
Okay, let's introduce them. And I'll have you say your own name because I never can pronounce your last
You
name.
can't spell it or pronounce it. It's Bill Vogley, I'm chairman of the Windsor Housing Authority.
Okay.
And I'm Jeff Fennis. I work for Sam at the Loveland Housing Authority. I'm our Director of Development.
Okay. And who else? Do you have some other folks from
Anybody else?
Windsor Housing?
I guess that's it.
Okay.
So first, thanks to Sam for coming in tonight and taking the time to meet with everyone. As I told Sam, that we're in the beginning stages of looking at the housing policy currently in place and looking at ways that we can improve on that and getting some of his thoughts and ideas of things that have worked from his experience, things that don't work. He has a lot of experience in many different areas of housing. I don't know all of your background, so feel free to share some more information. I know you worked for the state and you've worked with Loveland Housing Authority for many years.
Yeah, I'm a one-trick pony, and so I have had other jobs besides the one I currently have, but they've been in prehistory. So I've been at the Housing Authority for 41 years. So what I did in the past is probably irrelevant at this point. Because whatever I did back then is all different now. Anyway, so thank you, Carmen, and thank you, Town Board, for asking me to come over and visit with you a little bit. I don't have any magic bullets. I don't have any magic dust or fairy pixie dust to sprinkle on the town over here to give you any magic answers, because there really isn't any. That's what I've come to learn in 40-some years, is there's no magic bullet. There's no one thing that's just going to solve the problem for us, with the exception of one. And the one thing is money. Money cures everything. And I say that only half jokingly, because really when you think of the different types of social problems that exist today, this one, affordable housing, becomes a math problem for the most part. It is solved really arithmetically. It's just really a case of the relationship between a family's income and their housing costs, and how you make that affordable to them. And what I tell you is that we have a very incredible economic system in this country, probably the best in the world, but it's not perfect. And the imperfections, the warts, are shown up in programs like ours, in affordable housing. And so what we have to do, our challenge at the Loveland Housing Authority, at the Windsor Housing Authority, and every nonprofit that's looking at trying to do affordable housing, is how do we fool the system? How do we fool the economic system that we currently have in place? How do we make something that really costs $1,000 a month to rent for $250? Because the $1,000 is reality. The $250 is our fake reality, because we have to do that. That's how we make things work, is we subsidize them. And we figure out different ways to subsidize them. In the past, we subsidized them with monies from the federal government through rent subsidies. Today, those programs are very few and far between, The way we do it today, for the most part, is the way we've done Windsor Meadows, is with tax credits, and so the subsidy comes in on the front end. So instead of that project costing, well, it costs the same amount to build, but instead of us having a mortgage like a traditional developer would at 80% of the value of the project, we have a mortgage that's about 20% of the value of the project, because everything else we bring in at the front end through tax credits. And that program today, the program that we built Windsor 2 with today, is in jeopardy. That program, if the tax bill goes through today, as it's currently written, will not be around next year. And that one was built with 4% tax credits that are financed with private activity bonds, which has been a very useful tool for us in the last few years. And that one is one of them that is on the chopping block today. And so the challenge going forward for us is rather great, because in addition to that, and with the changes in the tax code, that has a direct effect on our ability to raise equity through the sale of tax credits, because the investors are buying the credits based on their current tax liability. And if their tax liability goes from 30%, where most corporations are, to 20%, where it's being proposed, that, or 35%, that's a 15% drop. And that's going to be directly impacting our ability to raise equity through credits. So the price for our credits is going to go down by 15 cents. On a project like Windsor Meadows 2, that would have made over $1 million gap in that project. And we have to figure out how do we fill that gap. But you didn't really ask me here to tell you about all the problems. You told me this week here to tell you about what are some of the solutions. And so let me share with you some of those solutions that Loveland currently incorporates. And again, Loveland doesn't have the richest programs in terms of the city policies as it relates to these sort of affordable housing policies. They have some, and they have a really good housing authority too over there that helps them, and so that makes up the difference in a lot of cases. But some of the tools that they do have that we have used and have been very effective for us is, one of them is fast tracking. So when we put in a development request, when we're submitting a request for a new development, because most of what we do is new construction, like we've done over here with you all, we get put to the front of the line. And so they take our development proposal and they advance it forward of everyone else's. And that could save us as much as 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year in some cases. And time is money in these projects. And so, again, I'm going to go back to my original statement saying that there is no magic bullet, but there's a bunch of little kind of sort of magic BBs out there. And that's what we currently make use of, is the BBs. And one of them is the fast tracking. Another one that they have is relaxed development standards for affordable housing. And so affordable housing projects can request a relaxation in parking standards, and those will affect both senior as well as family developments. And then there's going to be a new parking ordinance that's going to be put on the books here shortly, that's even going to drop it below some of those standards for housing that is addressing families and individuals at 30% and below. Because in Loveland, we're starting to think about how we house our homeless population. And when we do homeless housing now, the expectation is that the parking should go down significantly, because most homeless people don't have cars. Not all of them, but a lot of them don't. And so they recognize that, and they'll offer a lower parking standard for that. And again, parking spaces cost money. You got to buy the land for it. You got to set the land aside. You got to pave it. You got to maintain it. And so there's the savings in those things. Again, any one of these things by themselves wouldn't make the housing affordable. But you have to congregate them together, classify them all together, and then they start having some meaning. Another one that they do is we have we have fee waivers in Loveland that have been used for an extensive period of time. And so for affordable housing, we have no use tax. We're exempted from use tax. You all have done that over here as well for the last 2 developments that we've done, I believe, right, Ian?
That's right.
By there, it's written into the code, so we don't have to ask for it, it's just an automatic over there now. Recently, the council passed a new initiative that's really gonna be, I think, helpful and beneficial. And this hits the number 1 big book B that I've talked about, money. And that's a 1.25% of the sales tax now is going to be diverted into an affordable housing trust fund. So Loveland for years has had an affordable housing trust fund on the books, but it's never figured out a way to capitalize it. And so this is now their method of, this is their first entry into creating a permanent, sustainable source of funding for affordable housing. That fund will generate about, based on current tax projections, about $500,000 a year into that fund. And so that'll be significant.
What do they intend to use that for, or how do they use that money?
Again, it's just specifically for affordable housing, and they are
Okay.
looking to use it,
Or-
yes, primarily, and they're looking to use it with 2 partners primarily, and that's with Habitat and with the Loveland Housing Authority.
Was that something that just passed in the last election, or was it?
It was prior to the last election,
okay.
so it was over the last year, in 2017, it got on the books. It was passed in 2017, but it was prior to this election.
Okay.
So that's not an additional 1.5% sales tax, is it?
No.
It's 1.5% of the
Of the-
sales tax
Right,
that they're taking in.
Diverting.
right, they're just diverting
Okay,
it.
so they're just earmarking
Right,
1.5% of their total sales
Right.
tax collection. Gotcha.
right, because you know, Ken, if they,
Yeah,
they'd have to, it's a Tabor issue, so in order to increase more, they'd have to go to a vote.
right,
And they didn't want to do that,
right.
but they can make that election just to divert a piece of it, which is what they chose to do. So that's a big deal. And really, if we want to move the needle in northern Colorado, that's what we're going to have to figure out collectively on probably some sort of regional dedicated funding source. You know, I hate to use the T word, but that's what it is. It's a tax of some sort. You know, you want public benefit, there's got to be public investment. So those are a couple of things. A couple of the other things that we can request on a case-by-case basis, and this is usually through the PUD process, but they're going to some new zoning, and I don't know what the name of it is. I just had a visit with Greg George, who's now working as a contract person for the city. He's their chief planner. They're going to create some more flexible zoning that allows, that can create greater density. And so they're not going to call it necessarily a density bonus at this point, but that's effectively what it's going to be. So a developer can come in and say, I've got a piece of ground here, it's currently zoned for 4 units per acre. I want to do 7 units per acre, and I'm going to create 2 of the additional units per acre as affordable. I'll set those aside as affordable. And so with those kinds of, you know, they're gonna allow that type of negotiation to go on.
Performance-based is what they're typically referred to.
Pardon me?
In the planning world, we call them performance-based options.
Okay.
Those units stay affordable in perpetuity, or is that just for initial owner?
So it depends on what it's for. If it's for rental housing, it's gonna be for a 20-year period. And I think the same is going to be true with the home ownership. They've had a challenge. They've had some ordinances on the books for home ownership, but they haven't sweetened up the deal enough to make enough incentive for many private developers to step forward. And those regulations have been on the books for 15 years now, and now they're realizing that the proof is in the pudding, and if you're not getting developer to bite on it, then you're gonna have to enhance the incentive. And so that's what they're trying to do with the density stuff and the relaxation of fee waivers. And that's gonna be, the relaxation of fee waivers is also gonna apply for-profit developers as well as nonprofit developers as well. Again, with the commitment of keeping it as affordable housing for a minimum of 20 years and deed restricting it accordingly.
Location of affordable housing. It seems like there's several different models, a number of different models. You can have something like Reserve Meadows, where it's kind of a facility. You mentioned Habitat, which might be integrated in the neighborhoods. What are your thoughts about pros and cons of that?
Oh, I think Habitat's is one of the best programs around. The challenge is that in Loveland, they can build about 4 to 6 units per year.
Because of money?
Yeah.
Money, okay.
Yeah, and they have a fairly aggressive program. In fact, the chair of the Habitat, I brought him along with me tonight, in case you wanted to ask him questions, and that's Jeff.
Good.
So Jeff is the chair of the Habitat Board in Loveland. And Jeff, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, my question on Habitat would be, how to ask this, approximately how much lower would the mortgage be for a person that goes into a Habitat home than?
Well, it depends, because there's a formula. In the end, they get a mortgage, which Habitat will usually carry. And with the soft second, that offsets the first, so that the first mortgage payment is 28% of their income.
28% of their
28%. And then that soft second, if they stay in good standing over the years, is slowly written off.
And there is a time period, right?
Right.
Is that the deed restriction type thing? Or is
That's separate,
Okay.
but it's usually 20 years for that soft second to work itself out.
So Habitat homes are deed restricted for 20 years?
30, I believe.
Oh, 30.
Yeah.
So how long
But
does the
the soft
original
second
owner
is
have to
20.
stay?
They can sell at any time, but Habitat would get the first right of refusal to buy it back.
Oh.
And then at that point, it would get recycled, or if Habitat chooses not to buy it, which usually doesn't happen, it could go on the open market. But the deed restriction goes with it, so somebody that qualifies.
So it has to still remain with a qualified.
Right.
Okay.
And one of the things that we do when we do home ownership or affordable rental in Loveland is we commit to the city permanent affordability. So we don't put a time limit on it. And that's one of the things that the city likes about that, is that the investment that they make in us is gonna stay there forever then. And so that when we have a homeowner who purchases a home that has a deed restriction on it, then they're required to sell it to another income qualified buyer when they go to sell their home.
Sam, if I could jump back to, one other thing I'll mention if you're thinking about Habitat is each affiliate has the flexibility to structure themselves and run themselves as best suits their community within the Habitat guidelines. But things like deed restrictions could be negotiated different.
I had a call into Larimer County Habitat. I haven't connected with them, but you know, do they run the same way as you do?
It'd be very similar. I'm not familiar with Larimer County.
Or Weld County, I'm sorry.
Or Weld County.
Weld County, I'm sorry.
Don't know much about them.
Okay. Weld County, man. Weld County.
Some of the other ideas that Loveland has played with is inclusionary zoning. Are you familiar with that concept? Okay, so inclusionary zoning, there's a few communities that have that. Longmont, Boulder, Denver, 3 of them to come off the top of my head that have that. And that is that whenever a developer is building a subdivision, and usually they have numbers associated with them so that it gets triggered when the subdivision is of like 20 homes or more or something like that. So they're not working with the one-off kind of guy. But a developer that's coming in and building a subdivision, they have a requirement to build 20% of the units as affordable. And they define affordable as families at 80% or below the area median income. If the developer chooses not to do that, then the developer can pay a fee in lieu of. It's called a payment in lieu of that instead of building the actual unit. And those payments are, you know, $60,000, $70,000 a unit. And so they're not insignificant. And then that money is collected by the town, goes into their affordable housing trust fund, and then they take applications from the housing authority and other developers who want to use that money to create affordable housing somewhere else in the community.
So how is Loveland going, they're collecting this money now through different sources with intent of helping Habitat. How do they decide who gets, how do you decide which homeowner gets to do that?
How does Habitat decide that?
Yeah.
The city
Will
doesn't
the city
decide that.
decide, or will
No.
Habitat?
That decision isn't made at the homeowner level, it would be project dependent. For example, on the
So are
Habitat,
you talking about the
No, I'm asking about.
the
Loveland.
sales tax?
Yeah, like Loveland,
Is that going all to Habitat? No.
it could.
It goes to both.
Okay, a portion of it, that 500,000 a year?
yeah, it goes to both, so when either, I'm really both, I wear both hats. That housing authority or Habitat has a development project, they could approach city council and ask for it, as could a private developer. So it's evaluated project by project, but Habitat and the housing authority get priority, get preference. So back to your question, we make sure we stay in good contact with the city and city council, so they know what we're thinking several years ahead of time, so they can manage that budget.
So let's just say you have 10 people who want to take advantage of the Habitat program. How do you decide who?
So Ken, I think that decision's being made at the different level of what you're talking about, the individual
The town
homeowner.
is involved in that,
No,
right?
not at all.
Okay.
So the Habitat might be coming to the town council, or city council and saying, we want to build 4 homes next year, 5 homes, and we need fee waivers of $100,000.
Okay.
And then that's how that decision's being made. They're not getting into the, kind of the weeds of what's that family look like and that kind of stuff.
And one other
But you're
last
not
thing,
targeting veterans, seniors, police, fire, teachers, you're not targeting.
not
a
looking at
particular
that
group
funding.
in Loveland, okay.
Some of our specific projects do.
Now, the housing authority, that's where we get down to that
Because you're
level.
doing some
Right, So,
veterans.
right,
okay.
right. And so we do some prioritization at that level when it comes down to us.
Okay.
Just like the Windsor Housing Authority is kind of making some of those
Right.
decisions.
Right.
Now, we're obviously listening to the winds, so we're not proposing things that we don't think council's gonna,
Right.
agree with necessarily. Boulder has some of the more richer programs, and they have a multiple set of sources of funding that come into theirs. And really, you'll find that the communities that are most successful do not rely on any one strategy, but they rely on multiple sets of strategies in order to bring in the necessary resources. Because again, this is a math problem. And we don't really care whether you call it fee waivers, whether you give us $1 out of your pocket, or whether you give us land. It's all resources. And those are what helps to create the affordable housing. And so in Boulder, they put a tax on commercial development. So anytime a new building is being developed, a new commercial project is being developed, there is a certain impact tax that is placed on that building. And again, you gotta figure out what works for your community. Boulder is one of those kind of places that can make those demands because they're, people wanna live there. People wanna locate their businesses there, so it's a high demand.
Is that a one-time fee or is it
Yes.
an annual?
No, it's a one-time fee.
So you mentioned that some of the ownership projects that you do are permanently deed restricted.
Yes.
So I've seen a lot of the news stories about people who buy one of these deed restricted properties and they then want to sell the home, but they're still under the deed restriction if it's a limited time frame. And they're saying, hey, I don't get to take advantage of the same economic advantage that a regular homeowner does in that the home is increased in value and they're able to cash in on
Right.
that. So how do you guys work that as far as, if the market value of the home was 200,000 when they bought it and it's 350 when they're selling it, do they get to capture any of that as a deed restricted homeowner, or how do you guys work that?
Well, two things. One is that Let me give you an example at Marisol where we sold affordable homes, deed-restricted homes, and market homes. And in order to protect the value of that market home, because we didn't want to sell the same home right next to them for $50,000 less, because that would have destroyed their value, right? So what we did is we sold them basically at the same price, but we took back a large second, a soft second, that the housing authority holds. $50,000 soft second, and told the owner, you never have to pay anything on this soft second, as long as you continue to live here. And once you go to sell, you still don't have to pay anything. You don't have to pay it off, as long as you sell to another income qualified buyer. If you choose not to sell to an income qualified buyer, then we're going to want our money back and interest. And so we create a large disincentive for them to sell it to a market rate buyer. But we do allow them to capture appreciation as long as that new buyer can afford to pay what the appreciated value is, and that they're a low income buyer.
That's what I was gonna ask is, does the seller walk away with any equity?
They can, yeah, they certainly can. In most cases, they have.
To obviously help them make the next step.
Yes,
Which
right,
keeps them out of it.
right.
And the second, soft second purpose of that is to protect property values when you have a home integrated in a neighborhood.
It's two things, to protect property values and to ensure that the home gets resold to another income qualified buyer.
Which is consistent with having
Okay.
that.
So what's the next step if they sell it to a non-qualified buyer? You get your 50,000 back plus interest,
Right,
and you just put that back into your coffers for the next
Right.
project.
yep.
But there's one less affordable unit on the market.
That's right. And that's why we try to create as much disincentive for that to happen as we can, but yet still allow some appreciation to happen as well.
I'm gonna ask kind of a different kind of question, but it kind of relates to this, what they walk away with or how they
Right.
could sever or transition, et cetera. Some of our local law enforcement has been out to the Windsor Meadows, the one north of King Soopers. Yeah.
That's right.
Sorry, I try to call them by the right name. And has noticed from some of the residences that they've been in that they've been trashed. What's the method by which that resident, I mean, they might be able to live amongst whatever they've done in there or haven't done or whatever, you know, how is that handled upon their departure? I mean, is it taken out of equity? Is it, you know, I mean, those are rentals, so I mean, maybe that's handled,
Yeah,
you know.
just like a normal apartment complex.
I was just curious, we
Yeah.
were talking about that and then I had the,
Yeah. No, we do annual inspections at a minimum of every unit.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's not to say that someone can't trash their unit, and it doesn't happen on occasion. I would say that probably 95% of the units out there, you wouldn't know any difference. And-
I have no specifics, and I don't know what the definition of trashed is. They
Right,
just had
right.
said that they've been in a couple, and I don't know if that just means they're messy or whatever, but I was just curious about
Yeah.
whatever that definition is, how that's handled, if they're
Yeah,
handled
no,
like a normal.
We treat it.
Is it like a deposit? Is it like a deposit that they
Yeah.
forfeit?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They have a security deposit,
There's
just
two
like,
points,
just
there's
like.
2 points here, because I had the privilege of sitting on the housing authority, so I hear what they have to deal with. And there's been a couple of people who really, above and beyond normal wear and tear, pretty expensive, but for the most part, it's very minimal numbers. When someone does trash the apartment, it's pretty expensive.
When it happens, it really happens.
It really
It's
happens.
a
And
problem.
one incident can be pretty expensive to you. The other thing about this, and it's kind of related to what you're asking too, about the police. I've talked to the police twice now, and I've asked about, do we have a higher incidence of police calls in response to low-income housing areas than other areas? And the answer repeatedly is no. So I think that's some kind of keep in mind too. It's a public image sometime that low-income housing is crime. And we don't have any evidence of that.
No,
Large scale.
we've done the same sort of studies in Loveland, Ken, and we get the same responses, it's no different. Sometimes we get slightly higher calls for some domestic stuff and things like that, but the reality is that we probably do as good of a job of screening as the private landlord does, and probably more so, because we have so many compliance issues that we have to be concerned about. And, you know, we're a professional management company. I mean, this is what we do.
The most significant one we had out there was in we asked them to hang pictures with adhesive and so forth, not with screws. The tenant didn't do that and screwed it into the wall. And of course, nothing happened for about 2 years, and then when she was going to leave, unscrewed the screw, which had gone through to the sprinkler system and punctured that, and as long as the screw was in, no water. Instantly, water came out of that. That went down not only her apartment, but the one below, and we had drywall problems in 2 apartments and a complete flood before the fire department could get out and get it shut off, which took 15 or 20 minutes with a good flow of water. That can do a lot of damage to drywall.
I want to ask a public relations social question. Among some people, there's perception that if you cluster low income, that there's a tendency to take less care of the property than they should, versus being low income housing integrated in the neighborhoods. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't think that, I don't think it's a great idea to cluster very low income with, for folks that come from a historically deep poverty situation. And when you're talking about the clustering that I think that you're referring to, Ken, we don't have that type of clustering anywhere in this state. That type of clustering exists in places like Pruitt-Igoe, Robert Taylor Homes in Chicago, where there are thousands of units in one location. And they're dealing with people, you know, when we have a lead problem out here, it's lead-based paint, and we're trying to figure out how to remove it. In those ones, it's high velocity, high impact lead that they're worried about. And so it's a different deal. And so the type of densities that we have here in northern Colorado especially, I'm not concerned at all about those sort of, that sort of concentration.
And that's my impression too. I wanted to hear you say it.
Yeah.
I was in Loveland when they were building the units down off Eisenhower across from the lake. I heard public sentiment.
Sure.
And you look at those today, and they're in excellent condition. They're not trashed, you know, and so.
So what you see out at Windsor Meadows and
Right.
1 and 2, that's what you can expect.
It's well cared for. Right.
And that's
But there is
the
a
type.
public perception
There
sometimes
is.
that low-income housing is going to mean her property values and those kind of things. And so
Right.
I don't think it does, but I want to hear. what
You're
your
absolutely
experiences were.
right. That's a prevailing opinion, and one that we fight all the time. And we do that with different ways, and sometimes we'll take pictures into a meeting and say, pick out which one of these is the affordable home. And it's one of those games, because they're all the affordable homes, but none of them look like it. And that's, we realized this long ago, that we build and develop these projects for 2 sets of folks. The ones that are gonna live there, it's gotta work for them. We have to design it right so that it works for them. But the other set of folks has gotta work for some folks that are never gonna live there, but are gonna drive past it every day. It has to work for them too, because without that second constituent being pleased, we don't have to do this anymore. And so we can choose to be an asset, or we can choose to be a liability to a community. All housing authorities have that choice. They make that choice, whether they know it or not. And we've chosen that we want to be an asset to the communities that we work in.
We fought that out at Meadows too for about a year, and
I know.
the only way, the easiest way to overcome it, basically, will be held 5 different conferences and conferences for people to come in and talk about it. And actually, after about 1 year, it went quite well. And then when they saw the architect's design, which we asked him to do, no rooftop to be any higher than any of the Windshire houses. It was to have the brick and the board to be consistent and representative and actually an asset to Windshire. It didn't stand out like a slanted roof painted purple and something, you know, weird looking stuff. And we think, and have had a number of architects and other authorities come in And I'm most impressed with the Meadows, the way it looks and how it fits. And I think that's probably the biggest thing now. I don't think we get any more than one or two comments about anything that goes on. You're always gonna have something, they don't like your playground, they don't like your basketball court and so forth. And one lady said, you know, I hope you don't think you're gonna have your children come over to our swimming pool. And I said, no, that is not a part of it. But your children are welcome to come over to our basketball court at any time, as long as one of our children are playing there and we have a lighted court. And that kind of took care of that. And so, you do run into it, but it really can be just like going out and talking to people and showing them what you're going to do. And once we showed them the design and so forth, we really didn't have any, after the first year, any other comments.
But actually, Bill didn't finish that story. The end of that story is, not only did the neighbors at Windshire accept the development, but they started inviting the kids over to the pool. And one family actually bought 20 memberships for our kids for the pool. So that was a real turnaround. But a lot of it had to do with what Bill said. You know, we had neighborhood meetings and we talked to people about it, because there is this kind of fear. You know, I mean, it's natural that people, you kind of fear the unknown, and we've kind of grown up with these stories about what low-income people are and these projects, and, you know, think of drug deals going down and, you know, murders and all that kind of stuff.
Sam, in all the things that we've talked about tonight, are we just talking ownership? Or are we talking rentals too? When they buy and then rent the homes out, can they do that in these developments?
Can they buy a home from us and then rent it out? No.
And there are definite rules about that.
Right.
So you don't have any problems.
No. Now, I'm not going to tell you that someone can't fool us and, you know, pull the wool over our eyes, but no, we do a pretty good job of making sure that the owner is the one living it.
Well, the reason I asked, I was president of an association. We finally had to set a rule, no more than 35%.
Right.
And I would imagine it's about 45 now.
Right.
And it just keeps going up. And it's hard to control.
It is. It is.
And I just wondered about, in these, because with low income,
Right.
naturally.
Right. We haven't had that experience. Miles?
Yeah, do you see a need for, I guess not low income, but more middle public servants, like police, teachers, nurses?
Yeah.
Is there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've recently gotten a lot of people who come up to me in Loveland and say, Sam, why do we have such a housing problem in Loveland today? And I say, well, it's because your kids can't find housing now.
Yeah,
And that's where it's kind of hidden now. It used to be the lower income kids couldn't find the housing. Now it's my kids and your kids that can't find it, because it's $1,200 a month for a one bedroom, and my kid only makes $900. You know, so go figure.
So could some of these same solutions could apply deed restriction for a certain job?
Yeah, absolutely, and mostly what you see is you're starting to see communities, especially the mountain communities, who have developed a different standard for who they're addressing their housing for. It's not just the low income, it's now in the 80 to 120% AMI, because, you know, places like Breckenridge and Aspen and places like that, and even in Estes Park, they're having that discussion today, because we work same with them as we do with you all here, and they're having a real difficult time on emergency service personnel, teachers, people that work in a hospital who don't qualify for the housing authority programs, but yet they're just being priced out of that market.
It seems like if we did some sort of inclusionary zoning in newer developments,
Yeah.
with a certain percent deed restricted for these types of jobs.
The challenge that we have at the housing authority in working with that is that there aren't any funding sources out there for above the 80 percentile. All the federal dollars and all the, you know, like tax credit programs, generally they're targeted to families at 60% and below. Some of them go up as high as 80. And then you got mortgage programs, you know, the FHA, of course, that have much less restrictions on. But for the types of programs that we work with, you get above 60 or 80%, and it's hard to find money. We're trying to work with the YMCA up in Estes Park right now, and they want to do a project that doesn't have income restrictions. Is it fine, but we're not gonna, you know, there are certain techniques that we have done that we can't do in this kind of deal because of that.
Well, Miles's question, I've been wondering about, well, first of all, you try to identify, is there a problem, and what is the problem? And I've been kind of looking at the next tier above Windsor Housing Meadows. And so last week I talked to our police chief and asked him about affordable housing for police officers. And right now we've got several police officers who are trying to find housing in town. And we have lost some candidates because they couldn't afford to live here. I had a long conversation with our fire chief and significant issues there. And they like everybody to be within 30 minutes. But you know, in Mill Fire, 30 minutes is a long time if you have an emergency. So there's a, you know, when you start talking about public safety, I don't know how big the issue is yet. So I'm just trying to learn more about, do we need to look at some ways to help fire and police to be closer, at least closer to town. Fire chief shared with me that he's got several people right now trying to find housing here, and he also has lost candidates because they can't afford it here. I think our town staff, we have lost candidates because they couldn't afford it. I have a call into the superintendent of schools because I know they have issues with teachers. Bank manager has told me that she loves Windsor, would love to live here, but can't afford to. So, I mean, we look at our medical assistants, our police, our fire, our teachers. You know, and I don't know how big the problem is right now, but my question is that tier, however you want to describe it, of service people for Windsor, how big is their need there for affordable housing?
And programs that work well with that group, several different types of programs that you could look at, density bonuses, those kind of work better for those home ownership programs, fee waivers, you know, attach some fee waivers to help bring the cost of that home down. Another tool that some communities have used is they give a help with down payment assistance, provided that you stay in that position with that employer for so many years, then it gets forgiven over time.
I asked a couple of realtors in town if they're finding people who want to buy a home but can't because of down payment, and they said no. And I think what happens is by the time a person goes to a realtor, they're maybe pre-qualified or they've already accumulated some savings, so they may not be seeing the people. So I don't know if that's a big issue, getting down payments or not for the tier, that next tier of people.
Really, what we're seeing in Loveland is one of the biggest problems is just the cost. You know, land costs have gone up significantly since the 2008 recession. Water costs have, geez, in the last 5-6 years have almost doubled over in Loveland. The fee in lieu of water, it's gone up to over $28,000 an acre foot now. And all these kinds of things. You know, in Loveland, if you go to build a single family home, you're into it for over $125,000 before you dug a hole.
Pretty good. My question about how Habitat determines who gets to take, I was thinking about service industry, and, you know, police and fire emergency personnel, and how you weigh that against a type of discriminatory practices. So that's why I was asking you, how do you decide who gets to apply for it?
So anybody can apply, but and there's a selection committee, selection process, minimum requirements, the ability to qualify for a loan, that kind of thing. But even Habitat, in order, you know, one of the things I've learned from Sam is no margin, no mission. And Habitat, even being a nonprofit, they at least need to break even at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And if you're moving everybody in at 30% AMI, the mortgage payments are that much smaller. Habitat's got to offset that somehow. And so they're incented to help out people at the higher end, 50-60% AMI. So there could be an opportunity there. It helps out Habitat, keeps more cash moving, maybe build more homes.
So if we look at senior housing, we look at Windsor Meadows, there's different levels of affordable housing. So that could be how we want to describe the next tier up or something.
Yeah, there is a real continuum of housing, you know,
Yes.
from shelter all the way up to ownership. And there's a bunch of steps in between, or it can be a bunch of steps in between.
And I think it sounds like maybe the town has a lot of interest in Habitat. There's definitely the opportunity if you had a local affiliate started.
I don't know what the title is, I don't know, I was asked questions about it.
So is that what it takes? You
Yeah.
have to create
I'm
your
speaking for
local
myself, not the word.
organization?
Local
because you
affiliate,
want
yeah,
to-
yeah.
Because I know Severance has had one, so they must have an affiliate in Severance, or there's been a house there or two, but, so that's what it takes, you have to create a nonprofit.
Or another could come in, you know, if it's Will County or.
I think Boulder County's helping Estes now, right? Boulder County
Yeah, the
has-
Estes Park affiliate was at risk of going under. Again, no margin, no mission. Habitat, so Boulder stepped in. So the opportunities there, and the other thing I wanted to mention too about Habitat, the traditional model is build single-family homes on a traditional lot, which is getting more and more difficult. And in Loveland, they were fortunate enough in 2008 to buy a whole bunch of lots coming out of foreclosure and find somebody to carry them. But going forward, that's their challenge, and they're having to get creative through partnerships, some with us, but being very opportunistic. And if the town got serious about that traditional Habitat model, expect that they're going to need some help with land acquisition somehow, whether it's when other for-profit builders come in, having them carve out some lots, make them affordable. It would take some creativity, but again, I think affiliate would very much welcome the opportunity to work with the town and get some direction and the support that goes with that, which is helping be that much more successful.
The challenge over here in Windsor is land. It's hard to find developed land that's,
And back to, I really do work for Sam, but I'm talking about Habitat. Other affiliates, because of land costs or lack of land availability, period, are starting to look at neighborhood revitalization and maybe finding a way to buy a home that needs repair and go about it that way. So that's another option as well.
So would Habitat ever consider building multifamily? Or is their model only
Generally, no.
single family?
Their traditional model is single family. In Loveland, they built some fourplexes. And when they're building 6 to 8 homes a year, that became difficult because they had to carry really the cost of 4 at one time rather than one at a time. So that caused some unexpected problems. But full-on multifamily, like the housing authority builds, probably not. That's a long ways out of their wheelhouse.
I said more like even just duplexes.
But yeah, duplexes or these fourplexes in the right situation, absolutely. And that obviously helps diffuse the land costs, which is why they
so,
pursued that in the first place.
I think you had a question.
Is there something in place in what Loveland does to ensure that those projects are serving people who already live or work in the Loveland community as opposed to, say, people coming from Denver or out of state or those kind of things?
Yes, it's a good question. We have, for all of our housing programs, a local preference for Loveland. So if you live or work in Loveland, you get a preference.
And how does that work as far as like how long they've lived there or?
We put no time limits on it, and so you could be living there for a day or working there for a day, and as long as you have that address now, when you apply, then you get the preference points. It's illegal to put a time limit on it. So housing authorities are allowed to set preferences, but they're not allowed to set time limits, because that's what some communities have done as a discriminatory practice by saying you have to have lived here for 20 years before you can apply, or something like that. And so whatever the composition of that community is now, that's whoever's getting in. And so it discourages any anything else from that.
You know, just with it, if it's tied to where they work, you know, if they get that preference through where they work and then change jobs and they're no longer working in Loveland, does that affect their placement?
Yes, in effect, if they're housed already, it doesn't affect them, but if the time when they come to the top of the wait list, they are no longer living in Loveland and we do a new application, then it affects their points.
Okay.
We do that in the Meadows too, preference to Windsor
Right.
people,
Right, that's exactly right.
Windsor workers.
Right. So that was, that's, the Windsor Housing Authority had the same desire to create a local preference as Loveland did.
Which I think is something that was directed by the town board when we approved some of the waivers. We wanted that to make sure that Windsor residents, so to speak, had a first option to be able to live there.
And that seems to make sense to me. You know, I mean, I'm as liberal thinking as anybody, but I think in taking care of your own first before you start taking care of others. So I guess, you know, if I were in your shoes, I'll give you my 5 words or 10 words of advice, I guess, is one, I think it's probably time, or have you done a recent housing study?
2015.
2015, okay. Time to probably pick that thing up and really kind of dust that off and start creating strategies for that, because I think it's important to create a set of strategies for home ownership, a set of strategies for rental housing. And start by thinking of as a rich set of variables as you can put into those policies that you think you can afford as a community. This is a tough deal to kind of create affordable housing. It's not getting any easier, to be honest with you. And we need more resources and not less. And so I wish I had some magic answers for you. I wish I had the pixie dust to give to you. But it really is the most important asset that we get in Loveland is political will. Really. We get the support of our town. And that goes a long way. Because without that, we're DOA. And so that's what we try to help Windsor Housing Authority do, is to make sure that the assets that we're helping them create and maintain aren't going to be questioned, because people are going to look at them and say, yeah, that's a great project. You wouldn't believe the number of people I've had that have remarked on that project to us. It's really one of our nicer projects that we've been a part of. And you all have something to be proud of over here, I think.
And we had great support from the town board on the fees and the waivers in that particular area. That was a great help to us during the building of it. I guess I'd also say that right now we're looking at trying to get a senior project started. Basically, we find Century 3, I got a waiting list of about 180. And the problem, of course, down there, or with any senior project, they have to be able to maintain their apartment on their own. They can't, it's not assisted living or anything like that. But we don't lose, I shouldn't say, our tenants don't disappear because of about 3 things. One is they die right there. They go to assisted living, and sometimes the family will come in and take them to a closer facility there. But for the most part, if we have a turnover of 10 a year down there in the 72 apartments, that's a big year. And so with 180 sitting out there waiting to get in, they got a long wait. And we're talking 2.5 to 3 years is what we tell them. And over at the Meadows, you have a little different situation, but you still have a waiting list on Meadows 1, I think it's about 160 right now, and on Meadows 2, it's about 200. But the problem you have to be careful of there is that a person can come in and they have AMAs of 30, 40, 50, and 60%. And they will sign up for Windsor Meadows 1, and they also sign up for Windsor Meadows 2. So that list is, you imagine like 200 on each, but there's 100 of them or more that are double signed. And so they're trying to get in as quick as they can, wherever they can. And the last thing, I guess, I've been out in the last month, and with Jeff, and we've looked at least 6 properties of at least 5 to 6.5 to 7 acres for our next project. So we are looking, some of them are in town, a couple of them are on the edges. One is in Larimer County, as a matter of fact. But we are looking at that. The biggest problem we are running into at the moment, of course, is cost and water. A couple of them we can afford pretty much with the land, but the water just knocks it out. And it's pretty unacceptable in most cases, in some cases. But we've had a real nice selection of 3 properties from Martin Lim. And he has given us a good price on one of them. It's one that has we have to look at what it really does do what we want it to do. And the other properties are pretty much right around in the town itself. And 2 of them would really be great if we could get them. But we're working on it. But the Meadows came to us as kind of a bonus because it was in 2008. Real estate had, pardon the expression, gone to hell in a handbasket, as Martin said. And he said by 2009, Martin said he was ready to lose what he had going at the time. We were working with Mike and Dino of Highland, Winshire, I'm sorry. And they were then very interested in getting that piece of property, 6.5 acres, were already identified for that kind of housing. So he gave us a great deal and water, and that really was probably the prize that we've been able to come up with at the time. Now everybody's holding on their land, they're increasing the cost for water, and so you have a difficult time finding things that set in just as well as the Meadows set in, because the people there had a great school, they had down at the stores, medical close by, within a couple miles. And you just couldn't ask for anything better than that. And that's what we're trying to do with seniors, and that's very difficult. Century 3 sits there, but of course it's 6.5 acres right in the center of town. It was built in 1948. Let's see.
Is that really 6.5 acres there? Doesn't seem that big.
You have to go ahead and look in the back. The retention pond back there must be about 1.5 acres or so.
Oh, wow.
But 4 of the units were built in 1968, and the other 8 units were built 6 years later.
What are these people doing just on the waiting list? What are they doing? Staying where they are?
Yep. Unfortunately, the last 3 we've had were living with their parents. I'm sorry, living with their children.
When Good Samaritan, was started, people just couldn't afford it.
Right.
And so they would stay where they are, and they couldn't sell their homes. And I just wondered if that's part of that problem too, and they really want to come to Windsor?
Yes, most of them have children here, as a matter of fact.
And that's one of the main reasons.
Right. We have a lot of that. We have people on the nearest, it's like Severance and areas close by, Kenan. But for the most part, these people are local people, and their kids are working here or in Loveland or Greeley or whatever. And they like to be closer, and they want their parents closer to them. And that's what we usually run into. We've had, just last week, we had a lady come down from Alaska, and her son works here in Windsor, and she's been on the list for 2.5, almost 2 years, and she moved in last Wednesday, I think it was.
Well, that's a big number on the waiting list.
Yeah, I mean, if we had 100 units right now, we'd fill them up, no problem.
And you really have a much bigger problem than just the ones that are on the wait list. Because people come in, they find out that the wait list is too years long, and they don't even apply.
They're gone.
In Loveland, the last time I looked, we had 2,800 families. And that's after we purged the list. Prior to purge, we had 3,900.
Okay. Anything else on this subject matter before we move on to the next one? Okay. Thank you very much for coming out and sharing all of your information with us.
Thank you, and thank you for making such a beautiful town.
This is cool.
This is part of the state affiliate.
I'd like to learn more about it. Okay. I need to know a little bit more about it.
Sure, give me a call.
Yeah, whatever you tell me, you guys
I gotta just there, so I think I guess if there's that.
There's 2 chairs down there.
My computer died, my iPad, so if you'll read the next.
You know what? Let me pull it up.
I know it's broadband, something.
See you. You need my charger.
So where are we going with this?
With housing?
Yeah.
Well, we have a follow-up next week.
Next week, yeah.
Next week we'll talk about it, okay.
And then we'll decide after we know if we need more information or what we are gonna do.
Thank you.
No, it's my old one, so I need the big fat.
Oh.
That's okay.
I'm not connecting.
Oh.
It's diagnosing problems.
Paul can read the next subject, which I know it's broadband, something. Broadband, yes.
Dun, da, da, da.
If I can restart my computer.
We get to.
I had it up just a little bit ago, and now I went to pull it up, and it says it's not liking me.
Says Miss
Should just say broadband discussion.
Humeline was the one that was leading this segment.
Totally.
I'm sorry, I haven't gotten the official pronunciation.
It's like yodeling with an H, yodeling.
Oh, totally. Thank you for saying that. It's tough. Yeah. Totally like yodeling.
Yes.
See, there's smart out, they can pronounce it just the same way as they.
Yeah.
Now, let's see if I can reboot this.
It is so cold here. It is cold.
Yeah, we just turned up the heat. It's cold. My computer's cold.
Maybe that's why it's not working.
Maybe so. It doesn't like it being cold.
If we turned it up, that means in about 15 minutes, we're all gonna be sweating and feeling on the way.
Right? Sorry. Sorry.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. You're right. Not intentional. I'm doing it too. Sorry. Okay, it's okay.
Stop discovering.
Oh. I can do it on my computer, so you can
I'm not connected to any networks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm just like, it's like shut down on me. So weird.
Is it the bottom one in the middle? Right there.
Yeah. What is it?
Maybe.
It's the Kins, actually, if you go back to that, Kelly. Yeah. The one in the middle, and then go to Kingston. Do you want me to go ahead and start with a brief introduction?
Sure.
And such?
It's, yeah, that would be great.
While
Thank
we're
you.
working on this? Okay. My name is Diane Cruz, and I am with NeoConnect. We are the consulting firm that the city of Fridley and the town of Windsor has hired to have your broadband study.
Okay.
We're just kicking off the study, and so.
What's the name of the company again?
It's called NeoConnect. Maybe I should give a little bit of background on myself and the company. I've been in the telecommunications industry for 32 years, and I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I suppose being an entrepreneur is my first love in business, so I enjoy starting companies, and NEO is my fourth. Prior to starting NEO, I was the founder and CEO of a company that was one of the early industry companies in the fiber to the home industry, which is essentially gigabit internet or gigabit broadband. And I started that company in 2002, and we worked with municipalities on planning and feasibility studies. We also provided design, engineering, and construction management of some of the first big municipal fiber projects that happened. During that time, I was peer elected to the Fiber to the Home Council. I was the chairman of the board for our nonprofit organization. And so I have been very involved in a national level in working with municipalities and counties on how to solve the broadband challenges. And for the past couple of years, primarily because of Senate Bill 152, we've been working in Colorado. So we are still a nationwide firm. We're based in Colorado. But because there's a lot of activity that's happening in Colorado, I would say 80% of our work is here. Thank you. Let's see. Is there a way to do this without clicking next?
Ken, did you want a chocolate chip?
It's usually the biggest challenge is the equipment. So why do we care? So let me first of all say that I'm not going to ask you to make any decisions today. We're going to have several conversations, and really what my purpose is to guide you through the murky waters of broadband planning and to help you decide if the city or if the town should get involved in solving some of these broadband challenges that we're having, and at what level of participation and investment could you consider. So I am not here as an advocate of one model over the other. My purpose is to help you make decisions. So I will provide information. I will help you sort through what the issues are. I'll talk about best practices, lessons learned. I have been in the industry a long time. 15 years is a long time in the fiber to the home industry. We're really, the founding principles, if you will, in the industry. So why do we care? So first of all, broadband impacts every sector and every industry and every part and parcel of our lives. And the existing infrastructure, although it is continuing to be upgraded from the incumbent providers, it is sometimes not keeping pace with what the demand is. And so what's happening with broadband demand is it's doubling every year or every 2 years. The same thing that is happening with cellular service, that too, in terms of bandwidth, is doubling every 1 to 2 years. And so we have an infrastructure issue in that many of the incumbent providers are not able to keep up with demand. So this is why we care. It is now becoming a necessity. It's no longer really a luxury. So what goes all involved into the broadband planning process? So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about policies and ordinances that are broadband friendly and what you could potentially look at from a very small level of investment that would help encourage further broadband deployment by reducing some of the capital cost of broadband deployment. We have kicked off some surveys in community engagement. Last week we were here and we met with key stakeholders in the community. Those included the schools and the hospitals, the library. We had a public meeting. We also met with several businesses in the area. I'm shivering. I'm not nervous, I'm cold. Hopefully that heat will start kicking in. We also kicked off some surveys, and those were kicked off 2 weeks ago. We've already got 383 respondents to the surveys, and so I'm going to go into 383 surveys already in just the past couple of weeks, and I don't think that we've done a huge push on promoting them. I know that there's been some promotion.
Yeah, we did press release and social media and some paid ads on social media as well, but not too much.
So I think that's a lot of results. We'll talk about the surveys and some of our preliminary data that we're seeing in trends. And then I'll follow up with a report after we keep it open. We're going to keep the surveys open for at least another month and allow people to provide input into the process. I think one of the really important pieces here is to take a look at where your assets are in town and who your potential partners might be. So one thing that we're doing is we're reaching out to the city and county government to map out where you have your existing fiber networks that are connecting your public buildings. We will also reach out to the energy companies and to CDOT and to the service providers because sometimes just having and starting a conversation with the service providers is a way to improve broadband services in your town. We've had a lot of success in working with the energy companies because they often have the same challenges as broadband service providers. The energy companies are deploying fiber to their substations for power management, and they're also looking at bringing fiber deeper into the neighborhoods for automated meter reading and power management, load balancing, and so forth. And so they're good candidates to partner. I like to tell this story because it was my least favorite account and client, and now it's my favorite, but I would lose sleep over it because it was really challenging to solve their broadband issues. It's a project that's out on the western slope, and it encompasses 6 counties. Some of you guys have heard this story, I'm sorry. But 6 counties in western Colorado. It was a huge geographic footprint. It was the same size as the state of Vermont. And they had really expensive broadband because they primarily only had one primary provider that was providing broadband services. And so, to make a long story short, we looked at trying to reduce their cost of broadband services by reducing the backhaul and transport costs that service providers would need to pay to get to internet supply. So just like having an adequate water, you need good water supply. Same with internet service, you have to pay for connection to the internet hub. So backhaul costs were really high because the internet hubs were based in Denver and Salt Lake City and Albuquerque. So what we decided to do is build a network that was connecting all of the 22 communities and 6 counties and their key government offices. And to build that network, it would have cost over $75 million to build it. So where's the business plan to make that work? Especially in a low population area, the density is not very high, low population, we don't have a lot of businesses. So we reached out to the power companies who had built fiber to their substations, and we convinced them that we had common problems and common goals. So what the common goals were and the common problem is that people were leaving, unemployment was on the rise, some of the mines were shutting down, and they were losing their large employers. And so they needed to change that economic development dynamic by creating infrastructure that would attract people to come and live there. So the power companies donated their fiber to the project, and that reduced the cost from $75 million down to $17 million. And then they applied for 2 grant programs. One was offered through DOLA, the other was offered through EDA, and they were awarded grant funding. So at the end of the day, their out-of-pocket cost was $3 million to build a fiber network that reached all 22 communities and their anchor institutions. And then Delta Montrose Electric Association decided to offer gigabit broadband services to all of the homes and businesses within Delta County and Montrose County. So now they have better broadband service in Paonia than you all do at really affordable pricing. So we'll reach out to the power companies. They are good potential prospects to partner with. And CDOT is building fiber for their RoadX project, and obviously the service providers are good partners. So this doesn't necessarily need to look like a Longmont model, but we'll certainly explore that too. So the check marks are the ones that we are underway. So we started the broadband planning process about a month and a half ago, and so we're underway with those items that are checked. We will also do work in regards to a public-private partnership. What could that potentially look like? In order for the town of Windsor to participate in a public-private partnership, you will need to opt out of Senate Bill 152. So I'll talk about that in a second. And then for each of the various models, we will do financial modeling and we'll provide our recommendations for the best options to further explore. Any questions so far? Okay. Senate Bill 152. Do we need to talk about it? Are you all familiar with it? Yeah,
I
let's
think
talk
we've
about
covered it pretty well.
You know about it?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, so I won't talk about it then. So maybe the next one. I'll just point out that over 100 municipalities, counties, and school districts have held an election. And in every election, it has passed with an average of about 77% in favor of opting out of this law. In some places like Durango and Estes Park and Telluride, it was well over 95% in favor of opting out of Senate Bill 152. Now, it doesn't necessarily say you're going to go forward and build a gigabit network as the town government. It just says that you can enter into public-private partnerships and that you can build out telecommunications infrastructure to end users. And it's just opting out of the current law. So what can you do without an opt-out? So the first two pieces you can, as a town, participate in terms of making an investment. So you can build out network infrastructure to your city facilities and other government entities, and then you can also build out to quasi-government locations like your schools, the hospitals, the libraries, and so forth. All of the other options to look at for service delivery, you would need to opt out of Senate Bill 152. There's been a lot of best practices in terms of marketing and communication, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel if that's something that you'd like to consider.
You have to just explore the option for public-private partnerships. That doesn't necessitate opting out first. You can kind of explore those options.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can explore those options. You just can't enter into a partnership, public-private partnership agreement. And the law is kind of goofy because it says that you can enter into little public-private partnerships, but not substantial. And substantial is not defined in the law. So there's a lot of question on, can you provide Wi-Fi at your community center, or is that a violation of Senate Bill 152? And so far there hasn't been pushback on that. That could be considered a little public-private partnership. But it's a little fuzzy. There aren't a lot of big consequences if you get pushback from the private sector. So the pushback law is that they could sue you for entering into a big, significant public-private partnership. And the penalty is that you would just have to stop. And then you could hold an election and potentially opt out. Any other questions on Senate Bill 152? Okay. So what is the existing environment in the town of Windsor and in the city of Greeley? So you all know that it's a joint study. So both the communities joined together to do a joint study. So one of the issues with trying to figure out what is the current state in a community is that there's a couple of data points to get this information, and some of the data is incorrect. So one of the data points is the carriers self-report what their service offering is and what the speeds are that are available within a community. And this information is self-reported from the incumbent providers. So currently, the FCC definition of broadband, your minimum standard definition, the FCC has defined it as 25 megabits per second in download speeds and 3 megabits per second in upload speeds. So that's your definition of do you have broadband or don't you? And that's the minimum. What other communities are looking at across the country and all around your neighboring communities, they're looking at trying to get to 1,000 megabits per second or a gigabit worth of service. So I would argue that your benchmark of 25.3 is really low. And you don't really want to base all of your decisions based upon this definition. But this definition drives a lot of the funding programs. So the funding programs are available to communities that are underserved or unserved, meaning they don't meet this definition. So the carriers, I think, self-report that you're covered. You don't need funding. According to this information, you're pretty well served. In Windsor, you have 97.91% of your population have capability of 25 megabits per second in download speeds. And 100% of your community has upload speeds of 3 megabits per second. So we tried to do a little bit deeper dive, and we tried to find out, well, if we put in service addresses into the carrier's website, what service do we actually have available at that address? So we pulled data by voting district, and that data included address information. And then we randomly put in this address information into CenturyLink's website and into Comcast's website. And let me first of all say, Comcast has the best speeds in town. We have a representative from Comcast here. So their speeds are much stronger than what CenturyLink offers by nature of their technology. So I think Comcast would agree that they can support download speeds fairly easily with their cable modem plant. And they're pushing out fiber deeper and deeper into the neighborhoods, closer to the neighborhoods. Where they have some difficulties is in the upload speeds, capabilities. And again, they need to drive fiber closer to the neighborhoods in order to support those type of upload speeds. Upload speeds are important because they're about creativity. They're about economic development. It's what you create and then share with the world. So home-based businesses, that's important, upload speeds. Same with your downtown core, your businesses. Upload speeds are their ability to put their product out there and to upload it into the cloud. So upload speeds are important. This is what we found when we did this random insert of addresses by voting district. We got a lot of information that service is not available at all. So maybe we should overlay your voting district with a map, geographic map, to see where these are, but I bet you guys know. District 2, 40% of the services that we entered in did not have any service available. And this is both with Comcast and CenturyLink. When we report, we'll do a deeper dive into each of the carriers to say what services are available with CenturyLink and what are available with Comcast. In the highlighted in red areas, then we have a lot of districts that they can't get something greater than 25 megabits per second. So this is on the carrier's website. So they self-report to the state and to the FCC. That's what the previous slide was. That's self-reporting. And then this next slide is what's available from their address, or from their websites. I was sitting in a grant hearing last week on the High Cost Fund, and there was a representative saying that, you know, maybe the data, there's a 10% of the information is incorrect. But this is, you know, we have to come up with some tools to figure out what can you actually get. I mentioned that we had 393 survey responses. And in the survey, there's a capability to do a speed test. And then we record what the actual speed tests are. And 49.5% of the speed tests fall below the 25.3. Now, the people that take these surveys are the ones that care. So someone self-selected, right? They have a problem usually, and they want to provide their input. They care about broadband. So in a way, this is somewhat self-selected. But I think the information, when we do the address input into the carrier website, that is pretty telling. So what this is telling me is that we need to dig a little bit deeper. So digging a little bit deeper, your broadband challenges are not solved. You're not totally covered. We need to do a deeper dive in what's available.
So when it's a 0% there under service not available, There isn't anybody in District 4 or 5 who cannot get service. That's what that's saying. Everybody in those districts has service availability.
No. 40% of the services that we put in, let me just do, say, District 2. 40% of the service addresses that we input into the website, we got a response, service is not available at all. There's no broadband service available at your address. 50% could only get service that was below 25 megabits per second. And 10% of the addresses could get service above 25 megabits per second.
But the ones that, the two that have the 0 there, those mean that they all had service.
They either 10% said no service at all, or 90% said they could get service above 25.
I'm talking District 4.
Oh, these down here.
District 4 and 5.
Okay, District 4 and 5, 0% of the addresses received a message that service was not available. So most of them are served. But, well, 80% get below 25 meg, 90% in District 5. So they have some service, but it's not very good, is what that should, what the takeaway should be.
And I would say that that follows the trends of where the newer developments are, obviously.
You can just sit back.
District 1 and District 6 are in the newest areas of town. I mean, that's newest technology, newest fiber, more accessibility.
They're in the better served areas? Okay. There's a
District
couple
1 and
of,
District 6.
there were people that came to the community meeting that were from a development. I can't remember the name of the development. I have it in my notes. But they don't have any service at all. They only have wireless service. And they reached out to Comcast and they could not get Comcast to install service. They also could not.
Steeplechase and Greenspire.
Steeplechase and Greenspire.
So, you know, maybe what part of the process here should be is say, these are the neighborhoods that have the worst broadband and they don't have any service available. What do we need to do to get you to install service at these locations?
You're probably going to handle this later, but in a meeting that I was attending, the fire chief, the police chief, and our public works director all were very unhappy with their service. They said it just isn't fast enough, and so, and maybe you're gonna cover that later, but are you?
Yeah,
No,
I'm
shut
gonna
up,
cover
okay.
that. Well, no, that's good that you brought that up.
And
I'll make
it,
sure
they
to
were
talk about
very upset that they just can't get the service that they need right now with what they have.
So I'll provide a full report after the surveys have been open for, you know, a longer amount of time, but our preliminary results have been that you've got a lot of people that are working from home. 69% of the respondents have 1 or 2 people working from home. That is trending with what we're seeing across the country and around the state. Something like 67% of entrepreneurs start their business from home. And 40% of Coloradans operate their business from their home. So these are telecommuters, these are people that are working at home. They may be working for a large company or they may be operating their own business from their home. But that's a large amount of the respondents.
So quick question for you, on that prior slide, you kind of kept mentioning the surveys, but this data is based off of addresses actually input, it's not tied to the survey of who did or didn't respond.
There's two parts of this that I'm reporting. One is the results of the speed test through the survey. And the results of that is 49.5% of the people that took the survey and the speed test, their data speeds were lower than the FCC minimum.
Okay, but the address input chart that we're looking at.
And then the second piece of that is we input sample addresses by voting district into the carrier's website, and this was the result that we received. So
and that's
two
going
pieces
into
of information.
both carriers. So for example, in District 1, when you say 10% not available, that's saying not available with either provider.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and for the report, we'll do a deeper dive into the results for CenturyLink and the results for Comcast. Any other questions? Keep going? Okay, I have a tendency to talk less, so I'll go through this quickly. So you've got people that work from home. One of the questions is, what is the role of government? If current providers are not providing adequate services, should the government step in and build a fiber optic network to every home and to every business? 51% said yes, that the government should do that. And another question was, is broadband a utility? And if so, would you be willing to pay a fee, whether you take services or not? And 63% said yes, broadband is a utility. This was sort of interesting too, and again, maybe the people that are taking the survey are self-selected and they really care about this, but one of the questions is, it talked about the city of Longmont being a gig city, and would you support the town of Windsor to build out a fiber to the home network similar to what Longmont did? And 71% said yes. 22% of the people said they would consider moving because of the internet.
Makes sense if your business is dependent on upload speed. You know,
Well, even download.
or and downloads.
I mean, the survey still talks about download speeds are a problem
Right.
in 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So what is the purpose of the study? So as I mentioned, my purpose in working with you is to help you navigate what level of investment is the appropriate level of investment for you, if any, and how do you do that? How do you get a return on that investment? How much does it cost? What's the financial model? What are the grants that are available that you can make that level of investment? What I really need from you is feedback on what you're comfortable with in terms of level of investment and what you would like us to do a deeper dive into. So for example, do you want us to study what the city of Longmont did and what the city of Fort Collins is considering? Or would you prefer a public-private partnership? Or do you think that it's important to build out to your community anchor institutions and public safety and to your schools and so forth? So this is the beginning of a conversation, and I'm not asking you to make that decision right now. I'll give you more information as we go. But these are the things that you'll need to grapple with as the town council, is what level is appropriate.
Can we even have the discussion about Longmont and Fort Collins when we don't operate our own utilities?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are municipalities that have built out a gigabit network that the town owns. Some of them have offered services then directly, like Longmont has, and
Yeah,
others.
but Longmont owns their own
They
utilities.
do.
Or they
You
did.
don't have to,
Which
on
kind of
your own.
helped generate what they were able to do.
I will
Windsor
say
doesn't
it's
operate their own
easier.
utilities.
I will honestly tell you, it's easier for a city that operates their electric utility. It is an easier transition for them to get into the broadband business. But there's thousands of cities that are looking at this across the US now. And there have been successful models of cities that don't own their electric utility in deploying a gigabit network. But it does make it easier, definitely.
Would you be able to give us advice on noticing return on investment? Whatever option we could look at. I'm thinking, okay, if a gigabyte means you have more economic development, then theoretically it would generate revenue for the town. So can you
Yeah.
give us,
Yep.
when we get to that point?
Yeah, so we'll make it real for you.
Okay.
So there's been studies that have been done that talk about what is the impact of, what is the economic development impact of a gigabit
Okay.
city. And currently, it increases your GDP by 3.1%. There's also studies that talk about how your property values increase. So property values, when you have a gigabit connection, can increase up to 7%. If you just have a fiber connection, it's a lower percentage. But we'll look at your average housing cost and we'll translate that into, real numbers for you all. So one level of investment is to facilitate broadband-friendly policies and ordinances, and use your existing assets to attract providers. And I have a slide specifically on what those policies and ordinances are, so I'm going to talk about that in a second. Another way is to look at putting in conduit to help the city gain assets that you could then potentially leverage to attract partners to build out a gigabit service. And what I would like to advise you on is, so one of the policies is a dig once and shadow conduit policy, which is essentially whenever there's work that's being done in the roadway or a trail widening, or a road widening project or a trail project or a multi-use corridor, or if somebody else is doing work in the right-of-way that they put in shadow conduit, and you guys pay for the incremental expense of that shadow conduit. That is a way for you to gain assets that could be leveraged, but you should do it in a way that is smart, so you're not doing it for every project. So what we will provide as a deliverable of the project is we will map out your key routes of where you need fiber, and they may be based upon connecting your key anchor institutions and or perhaps connecting your smart city applications. And we will provide a design of a fiber network and maps of that network so that you know exactly where you should put in fiber. So we just did this for the city of Arvada, and they rolled out a shadow conduit policy, and they're working with Comcast in the implementation of that. But one of the concerns that industry had was, oh, it's going to slow down our permitting process. You're going to, tell us after several weeks whether we should put in conduit. And they committed to the same 14-day turnaround, and they said within a few days we would tell you whether we wanted shadow conduit to be placed in the right-of-way or not, because they had a design. So we'll do the same thing for you all as well.
I have a question.
Okay.
On new construction, we have brand new developments, is that something that
Yeah,
would go along those lines?
For
that
sure.
they could actually put it to the house, or
yeah.
just
So
right-of-way stuff?
for your land use policies, we'll provide some specifications, but at a bare minimum, the developer and the builder should put in conduit from the home to an access point out in the street. And developers should put in conduit in the right-of-way that could be potentially used for fiber later. The most expensive part of this, so why we do these policies, the most expensive part of deploying a broadband network is the physical labor in opening up the trench and putting the conduit in. That amounts to anywhere from 60 to 80% of your capital costs. The fiber optic cable is not that expensive. To open a trench, it is. So to open a trench, it could be anywhere from $25 to $35 a foot to put in the trench and the conduit and to pull the fiber. When we're looking at maybe just the incremental cost of shadow conduit, it's about $5 to $7 a foot. The actual fiber optic cable, once you've got conduit in the ground, is about $1 a foot. So it's not that expensive. It's the most expensive part is in the actual labor of installing the conduit. So when you have these opportunities where somebody's doing work in the public right of way, at a bare minimum, do a notification to all of the providers saying we've got an opportunity for you to put in conduit. Please do that now so that we can all save money and improving broadband services. So we are mapping out your community anchor institutions, some of which have fiber already, and the city has already participated jointly with the schools in getting fiber to the schools and to some of your key government facilities. That's great. Keep up the good work. We will continue to look at expanding that existing network to other anchor institutions within the town. And we're also meeting with the Public Works Department on smart city applications and what potentially their challenges are. I'll bring this up now. In one of our meetings, it was brought up by fire, police, and public works that they have really terrible cellular service. That's not part of our study, but it's something that we might be able to influence and provide some impact. FirstNet is a program, it's a nationwide program that the state of Colorado is considering opting into to help with public safety infrastructure. So I think we want to see what happens at the state level with the state of Colorado and what they end up doing. But there may be also some strategies to improve cellular service and to improve public safety applications. One of them, low-hanging fruit, is to build out fiber to their stations and to the government locations so that when they are there, they have better access to weather reports and environmental conditions and emergency responses and so forth. Did I capture that fairly well in the meeting? Okay.
I think one of the other things that Miles brought up is one of the residents asked, well, how do we as an individual homeowner, when we build a home, how do we get that fiber? And I thought they were very satisfied with your answer. I'm not going to answer it. You might want to talk about it.
What did I say?
What did you say? That they bring it in and then the developer brings it in and then they branch it out to each of the homeowners. Something like that.
Yeah, so the folks at Steeplechase, because it's easier when the development hasn't been built yet. That one's an easy one because you just put in conduit in the roads into the home and then you have some leverage to work with the service provider. For Steeplechase, the homes are already built, and so they're kind of stuck, and they've reached out to Comcast, and Comcast has said that they won't bring services there. So there are some things that they could do potentially to help improve. One is to get a pre-commitment from the homeowners and band together, and that means something to the providers, and that can help them with their return on investment. Are you taking notes? The gentleman from Comcast.
He's looking up addresses.
I'm going to follow up with you.
I sort of see some things differently, but I'm just here listening. So.
Yeah. So there's some things that they could potentially do, and one of them is just to try to band together and then sit down with the providers. We'll look at level of investment of also building fiber to your key businesses and industrial park locations. And then we'll also look at what would it cost to build fiber to every home and fiber to every business, and what are the models to make that work? What is the return on investment, and what do you need for market share? How would a service provider look at that? How does a banker look at that? So we'll dive into all of those.
Well, one of the factors that we look at the eventual possibilities that are created from advancements in technology. I mean, it used to be that if you tried looking something up on your phone using your cell service, it would take you forever versus on your computer that was, hardwired to the internet. Now, those are very similar. So, when you look at the amount of infrastructure of conduit and fiber throughout the entire city versus what's available wirelessly, how do you try and look at those situations?
Yeah, and what about new technology? So I am an eternal optimist and an entrepreneur, and so I think that there will be advances. So we need to pay close attention to those advances. Google made a bet in building out fiber to the home, and then they pulled back a little bit from that strategy because they acquired a wireless company. What they found is you can get gigabit speeds over wireless, but it's on a point-to-point basis. And there are some vendors that are playing with the technology to deploy gigabit wireless, like in a downtown area or within a apartment complex or a multi-dwelling unit. So we'll still continue to pay attention. Right now, the distance is the limitation to offer that type of speeds over wireless. And what Google has found with their acquisition with Webcast is that it's about 500 feet. We are partnered with the design and engineering firm that's the lead design firm for Google. And that relationship has really sharpened us and our team. And Google was challenging us to drive down the capital costs and to quicken the deployment of their fiber to the home gigabit strategy. And there has not been a lot of tremendous advances, and we're still limited with the fact that they have to build fiber closer and closer to the home. I think Comcast would say that they need to also build fiber closer to the neighborhoods to get those levels of speeds. And same with cellular. In order to support cellular communications, those cell sites need to be connected with fiber. So I don't think that it's bad advice ever to tell you to invest in fiber networks. I think we'll see some opportunities in that last 500 feet, that there will be improvements there. And they will be with cellular, with DOCSIS 3.1, which is cable. It'll be with wireless technology. But I think a lot of our levels of investment in building fiber further and further closer to the neighborhoods, those are good strategies. That's not going to be sunk cost, if you will. So the depreciation schedule for fiber is 20 years. The shelf life of fiber is 50 years. And once fiber is in the ground, it can easily be upgraded by just replacing the electronics on both ends. Essentially what the electronics do is they add another color or spectrum of light. So you can increase the capacity fairly easily. So I think that you bring up a good point that we need to watch for technology advances. But what we'll bring to the table in terms of fiber deployments to anchor institutions and to cell towers and to out closer to the neighborhoods, those are still good decisions and levels of investment. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, I'm going to talk about policies, and then I'll be done.
Questions.
Okay. Okay. Let me tell you about the policies that we would recommend. And I would like you to start considering this now. Perhaps your best policies are ones that if there's work that's being done, you put in shadow conduit. Or at the very minimum, when there's work being done, you have a notice to all of the service providers and a notification period, letting them know that this is an opportunity. Let us know if you want to put in conduit. Do you want to share in the costs of doing so? Then I would suggest that when entities pull permits to do work in your right-of-way, that they be required to submit as-built drawings of what's going in there and what is in there, and start to build a database of where fiber is within the community. So we're helping you with that efforts now, because we're reaching out to entities to try to map out where there's existing fiber and if we could use that fiber. I would take a look at it from a policy standpoint to start mapping out where there's fiber. And then with shadow conduit, there is real cost in doing so, in putting in shadow conduit, just paying for the incremental expenses. I can't tell you how many opportunities have come up and there isn't a budget item to put in conduit. And some town managers have said, I'm gonna just run down to Costco and get some conduit, for crying out loud. Just, we have to put it in, we have this opportunity. So I would recommend a funding set aside in your budget. And it might be a small percentage of your public works or road improvement budget. It might be tied to economic development. But oftentimes these opportunities don't get put in place because you don't have the funding that's set aside in the budget. A similar type of policy that is kind of similar to Dig Once. So the ideas around Dig Once is that you have some restrictions in terms of how often an entity could operate in the public right-of-way. So you take advantage of that opportunity to minimize opening up that trench again and to minimize your disruption in terms of traffic and roads being closed. So it includes a notification period and some coordination on putting in conduit. A one-touch make-ready policy is similar to that, but it's about your utility poles. So make-ready expenses refer to what needs to be done with the utility pole to accommodate fiber. And so one of the things that usually happens when a fiber network is deployed is there's a certain position on the pole of where the communication space where people can put fiber. And sometimes AT&T's fiber needs to be moved to accommodate another provider. And so there's make-ready expenses, if you will, in terms of coordination and moving the location of the placement of the fiber. In some cases, a utility pole maybe needs to be replaced entirely because it cannot accommodate the weight or there isn't space that's available. We would recommend that, and this is maybe something to work with the utility pole owner, is that they roll out a one-touch make-ready process where it's also outsourced to one common entity that does all of that coordination. So that you, again, don't slow down the process of permitting, you don't slow down the process of getting your fiber implemented. And then, as you had mentioned, Miles, about land use policies, we'll provide sample language for all of these policies, and we'll provide specifications that you could potentially be integrating into your existing policies that reduce the cost of broadband deployment. So we'll provide sample language, and we can also take a look at your existing policies to see if they need to be tweaked to accommodate some of these suggestions.
Well, that's what I was going to ask too. Is part of your task is to help write the policy, or tell us about policies and ordinances, what we really need to make this happen?
I can give you sample language. I'm not an attorney. So I would suggest maybe working with an attorney to put the policies and language in place, but we can give sample language and give best practices in terms of what other cities have done. Okay, it's getting warm in here. I'm really hungry.
I didn't want you to jitter anymore.
15 minutes later.
And no one's sleeping. So stay tuned. So again, this was just our first touch base of what the process looks like and what to expect from this process. And so I bet you all have lots of questions. So fire away.
A couple. So in a public-private partnership, is that something where we potentially could put the fiber in and then lease space to multiple ISPs, or would it be one ISP?
Yes.
Either one?
Yes.
Because I'm thinking in terms of net neutrality, and could they, I worry about throttling,
Yep.
or tiers of speed or whatever. If we had the fiber, could we eliminate throttling? Or would that still be at the ISP?
You might be able to put something in it contractually regarding throttling if you're providing the capital cost of building the fiber network. But again, I'm not an attorney, and that's somewhat above my pay grade.
Could we dictate the prices that they charge? Because we've got I guess that would be part of the agreement. There's no point in us putting it in and then reaping all the benefits.
You can, actually. So that one, you could dictate the level of service and the pricing that would be available to your constituents in a public-private partnership.
Okay.
One of the meetings, we'll talk about what other cities have done and sort of the mechanics of a public-private partnership and what has worked well and what hasn't worked well. One model is to do what the town of Huntsville, Alabama just recently did. They built a fiber infrastructure to every home and business, and it's an asset that the city owns. And then many providers are leasing that network and providing gigabit services to the homeowners. Google is one of the companies that is providing services to homeowners.
Because then it would keep the municipality out of the
providing services.
Just kind of the highway and let them use it.
So the tension that you'll look at with a public-private partnership is how much control do you need to get the, I guess, level of reward? And control is about your capital investment and ownership. And then there's the risk of that. And there's definitely debt risk, financial risk, operational risk. And so we help you sort that out. And then the reward is, grappling with ubiquitous gigabit, so everybody in the town gets it. At what price? And what is your exposure in terms of take rate percentage or market share?
Okay. And do you see the current providers leaving town and not providing, for municipalities that do this, can they still come in and provide service? Like in Longmont, Comcast and?
Yeah, so Comcast and CenturyLink are providing services in addition to the
just
city
hack
of
up and leave
Longmont.
and-
They haven't yet.
Okay.
What other questions?
So was one of our next steps going to be getting kind of a summary of what came out of the stakeholder meetings?
So, we can provide a summary of what came out of the stakeholder meetings now. And we'll provide also a summary of the survey responses in another month. The work that we're doing right now is we're reaching out to map out where your existing fiber is today and to flesh out potential partnerships. We're also, at the same time, we'll start putting together the design and engineering of these various levels of investment and identify what the capital cost would be. And then in our partnership discussions, we will see if there are opportunities to co-invest or share fiber. There's some similar work to what we did with Region 10 and the power companies. And we'll also reach out to the service providers.
In mapping out this fiber that you're doing, are you getting good response from?
We're just starting that, yeah.
Just
So
starting.
we got a great response from Excel. They want to sit down with us. And CDOT has changed their mission in the past 2 years. They're not just moving people and cars around, they're also moving information. And so CDOT has been a great partner recently. I would say in the last 2 years, they are stepping up. They want to be a participant and a partner in some of these challenges. So we're reaching out to them too.
Were you looking to partnering with other municipalities? If Fort Collins is a little bit further along than us, could they just?
So I sit on a regional broadband group with the city of Greeley as well. And so Longmont comes to those meetings, Fort Collins, Loveland, and a couple other, and Estes goes to that meeting as well, and Larimer County. And so we're keeping that dialogue open, that door open. Obviously everyone's at different phases. Currently we're partnering with the city of Greeley, which I think is a great step. And who knows where that will go, but we meet on a regular basis every 2 months or so. We meet and just check in, how's it going? What issues are you facing? What are the successes that you're doing? So sharing those best practices, I think, is a good, healthy habit to have.
It just sounds like it would be cheaper if it was a bigger system than all these little silos of communities doing their own thing.
Yeah, and at the bare minimum, who knows, what communities choose to do, and I think Fort Collins is still exploring that. But at the staff level, administrative level of things, it's trying to find out if they're going to do it. Are there things that we could share potentially? If there is a regional type of broadband, okay, then a call center, certain things like that, or your substation. So seeing if there's certain infrastructure, all that nitty gritty that goes behind it, that could be similar and shared in that manner. So we're still staying on top of those conversations.
Only the highway divides us, so
Exactly. That's what I say all the time to them.
if we could just get it under there, or Greeley the same thing. We're right here.
And I think that's Windsor's strengths. Town board and your direction is constantly, let's stay at the table. Let's be leaders of small towns, if you will, and constantly have a seat at the table, and that's what we're doing. What other questions?
Bedtime almost.
Thank you.
Bedtime.
Great, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. We turned it up, we turned it
Well,
down.
can we take like a 5-10 minute recess before we go into executive session is next, correct?
Well, we got a
Special meeting.
special meeting to
Open up
take
special
action on the
meeting.
CRC model.
Oh, that's right.
And then,
But we can take a break because they were going to turn off the recording. I told her there was no reason to record, just this little bit that wasn't. you.